I am a professional economist. I was so at least for a couple of decades until I became a police officer in my second career. And I'm very happy to be with you.
Oh, well, happy to have you here as well. Thank you.
I believe that the government spends far too much energy regulating our relationships with each other and needs to get the hell out.
Well, that's my concern. I actually strongly disagree. I think the state has a responsibility to the best of its ability, there are no perfect systems, protect people from corporations. I think that corporations have an incredibly autocratic role in the
Do you think
lives
that we
most
ought to
people.
have
The far left's phobia of corporations is hard to understand. All corporations do is sell goods and services on the open market and offer employment to people. There's nothing to be afraid of there.
corporations from each other or corporations from unions?
In some instances, sure, a legal framework should dictate essentially all relations between legal bodies. Yeah. I don't know what exactly they need
The
protection
government should
from
regulate
unions,
all
but
relations among legal bodies.
yeah, like corporations, unions, you have to
I'm sorry,
file
that's a
these with the
fairly
government.
chilling statement.
Well, I don't think so. We have laws, and these laws already exist. You have to file for a union, right? Like these organizations, you have to write
No,
them.
I'm not arguing that they shouldn't have a right to exist. I'm just saying that the idea that the government ought to be regulating all relationships among legal entities between corporations, between us and corporations, between corporations and unions. I think that that is a frightening,
So,
breathtaking statement, to
it's
be
already
honest.
true. I can't
I didn't
throw
know
a
you were
rock
going
at
to
you.
go there. That takes my breath away.
Well,
That actually makes the hair stand up on the back of my
well, that's
neck.
the thing. What I said may take your breath away, but legal frameworks are what keeps me from physically taking your breath away. You know, if I were to meet you in the street and we were to get into a fight, like
That's not true. The legal framework may be an avenue in which you can be punished for that behavior, but really the reason why we don't all fight each other in the street is because we're decent human beings.
Big
dictate.
difference between a criminal code and regulating the relationship between two individuals in terms of an employer-employee
Well, wait, no,
relationship.
what? Fundamentally, this is just a legal framework that we use to guide people's behavior towards mutually beneficial outcomes. We have these guiding
Do you
behaviors,
feel
these
like it's the
systems.
government's role to guide our relationships?
If it would keep people from murdering each other in the street, then certainly, yeah. That is guiding people's behavior. That is the state using its power, its autonomy, its monopolization
Right.
over
Is that how you
violence.
feel about employer-employee relationships, that we're guiding people to avoid murder?
No, I think that we're not doing nearly enough to guide people away from murder, to be honest with you. I think that at the
Well,
current relationship
look, you
those
and
two
I
institutions
agree that
have are
we should
pretty
be
violent.
guiding people away from murder. I spent 11 and a half years of my life trying to protect the people's
Yeah, you were a
individual
cop. You
freedoms
were
and
an
rights from
enforcer of
bad
the
people.
state's role in guiding people's behavior with each other. It's just a matter of which laws we do or don't agree with.
Uh,
We know for a fact, because we have millennia of historical evidence to support this case, that if corporations want to set up a system where they pay you jack and you just have to live with it, that's life.
Okay, well, corporations have not been around for a millennia. I mean, it wasn't really until the 20th century, the late 19th century in America, that we saw large scale enterprise really becoming a thing, especially in manufacturing. You had the railroads before that. And it's also untrue that absent labor unions or state regulation, corporations would just pay us all pennies on the dollar. This is a fundamental misunderstanding, very common on Marxists. They think that gigantic firms can wield this sort of economic power and they can just dictate terms to everybody. However, if that were really true, then right now, everyone in the United States would make the minimum wage. But they don't. Only a tiny percentage of the people make the minimum wage. And the reason is wages in a market economy are determined by a worker's productivity. That's the upper bound, and then how close they get to that upper bound depends on the competitiveness of the marketplace. In America, in Canada, marketplaces are very competitive. You have a lot of different employers bidding up the salaries of workers towards their marginal revenue product. So it's simply untrue that what he's saying, that if corporations had their way, they would just exploit us. Well, maybe if they had their way, but competition between firms keeps the prices, the wages up. His mistake is, he's going back to the early 20th century, late 19th century, looking at wages then and saying, well, wages were really low then, they're really high now. It's because of the labor unions, it's because of government intervention. No, it's because of capital accumulation. What happened was people saved their income, they reinvested in the economy. That created more capital, man-made factors of production, which enabled workers to be more productive, which led to higher wages.
Greater power.
I'm sorry, where is there an example of that?
Literally all of human history, from feudalism downward, and through the first several centuries of capitalism.
That strikes me as similar to going to the argument about murder. I mean, why don't we focus on this century in this country?
This century,
is there really
you mean the 21st?
Place where you think that people feel
21st
so
century?
trapped that they need the government?
So we can ignore like historical precedent if you want, and I would just defer to undocumented immigrants. People who are not protected by the state because they're not citizens immediately get exploited by corporations here, because it turns out when you don't have the legal protections afforded to you by U.S. citizenship, and the first time you interact with a cop will be your last time in the U.S., that means it's actually really easy to exploit you. That's happening right now to millions of people in this country.
And to the degree that there's a problem there, it's because of the state. It's the state that criminalized their legal status in the country, not the corporations, not the market economy, the state. The same state that vaush champions as the solution to all problems everywhere. Are corporations exploiting illegal immigrants? I would imagine most corporations wouldn't even hire illegal immigrants. They're concerned about fines. They're concerned about lawsuits. I would imagine, I don't know if this is the case for sure, but I would imagine most of the people that are employing illegal immigrants are more like small-scale business. And either way, they're not getting exploited. They're being offered a wage, and they're accepting that wage. That's not exploitation. That's a mutually beneficial trade.
Because they can't rely on the state to protect them the way it protects you and I. They are not given the same fair consideration from corporations. They're treated worse.
Well, the exploitation of immigrants is a little bit deeper problem than that. The black market's created by the government precluding people from coming in legally and therefore incentivizing them to come in through human trafficking is a much richer problem than just people coming in and getting low-wage work.
I agree. I'm pro-open borders, but you have to acknowledge that without the protection of the government, those undocumented laborers are immediately exploited. We could get a comparable effect simply by removing government.
It's not
laws
because that they
workers.
don't have a minimum wage in place.
But they're not getting paid minimum wage in a lot of cases. So that often is actually the...
Even if they're getting paid less than the minimum wage, they're still making more than where they came from. There's nothing wrong with hiring somebody at a sub-minimum wage rate. That's not exploitation. By the Marxist definition of exploitation, every worker is getting exploited. So it's a nonsense, meaningless term.
The issue.
Maybe they are getting exploited. If you accept this overly broad definition, they're still engaged in a mutually beneficial trade. They don't have to sell their labor at $4 an hour if they don't want to. They want to. It's the best deal they're getting.
The market won't drive their supply of labor to a price that exceeds what you believe that the state minimum wage ought to be, or in some places already is. That is
They're
not
paid less than minimum wage. What's that? There are undocumented immigrants and U.S. citizens working side by side on farms in the Southwest. And the U.S. citizens are getting
paid
more.
less than the minimum wage. Now, what would happen if you instituted a minimum wage and made it stick in those places?
In a way that protects the undocumented workers? Well, then they would get paid minimum wage.
In a way that you call it.
No, what happens when you impose a minimum wage is they don't get hired.
Protection, but it's not.
No, that might not be the case with the illegal immigrants, because they're getting less than the minimum wage, not because of their productivity, but because of their precarious legal status. But again, the problem is the state that has created that precarious legal status. Absent that whole situation, then the workers will be getting paid relative to their marginal revenue value product, whatever that may be.
Protection, assuming those markets are clearing, and there's no reason to believe that those markets don't clear like any other market, what you're going to end up with is fewer people being hired.
Well,
that's not protecting
there's
them.
just no evidence to suggest that. Also, the number of workers we have working
That's
those...
how
The 2007 median household income of unauthorized immigrants was $36,000. Another study shows the mean and median annual wages of Hispanic undocumented immigrants. The majority of undocumented immigrants are Hispanic. The majority of them are from Mexico. The mean and median annual wages are $28,000 and $25,000 respectively for those who are employed 16 years of age or older. So vaush seems way off base to be suggesting they make less than the federal minimum wage of $7.50 an hour. That would be what, 15,000 a week, and they're making less than that. That's not what the study says.
So there's no reason to believe that they don't.
It's not how markets work. We need the number of workers we have because that's how we produce our food. The idea that if we had to pay undocumented workers minimum wage, that we would just suddenly cut like to a third our agricultural production because instead
you made
we just
up
wouldn't
those
pay
numbers.
The tens of millions.
You're going back to the murder example. Yes,
I'm not going to the murder example.
I don't think it's really fair
there
to
is
say,
no
well, we
evidence.
need government regulation, otherwise we would murder each
listen,
other.
You have not answered the question that I have posed you, the hypothetical here. You
All
say
right,
the government does not protect us from corporations, that it's not necessary to manage or regulate these wage interactions. But we have a group of people who are not protected by U.S. law, not functionally at least, undocumented immigrants, and as a consequence, they're horribly exploited for their labor. That would be you, and that would be me, if we lived in a state that didn't afford us any worker protections. We would be just as hungry and desperate as the millions of Americans who lived at the turn of the century.
I can't speak to your resume. You graduated from Humboldt, and you seem like a very educated guy with good skills.
Thank you.
I'm fairly confident that you would be able to get a job paying over minimum wage if the government failed to protect you in some sense. I think that that's a silly thing there.
Could I enjoy that wage knowing millions of my countrymen were living in row houses starving because they didn't happen to be born into an affluent family like I was? I would be the same person then, arguing. Do
you really think that's how labor markets work?
Well, historically, yes, most people have been poor, so that is an empirical fact. Do you disagree with the assertion that around the turn of the century, like 1900 or so, that most Americans were poor?
Depends what you're talking about. Relative to global norms, it was they had some of the highest incomes in the world. Relative to today, yes, they're poor. We've had a century of progress.
Were poor. The reason that they were lifted out of poverty is because markets were allowed to work. The reason that wages were so low at the turn of the... I'm sorry, you find that funny?
I do, but I was going to let you finish.
That's the historical record. I don't think that's a very contentious statement. That's just how economies have developed. And by the way, not just the United States.
In the 1900s,
the reason wages were so low at the turn of the century is because there was such a great deal of labor available in the agrarian economy that was migrating slowly to the urban economy. There was so much labor available that there was no way to drive up wages except in the very, very long run.
And yet the robber barons who controlled the factories those millions of poor people happened to work at for 12 or 14 hours a day were very well. It was because they were...
Here's what Ludwig von Mises wrote about industrialization in England. You know, this was a century and a half earlier than the time period they're discussing. But I'd assume the situation was pretty much the same, because this was when they're talking about industrialization in America. The factory system developed in a continuous struggle against innumerable obstacles. It had to fight popular prejudice, old established customs, legally binding rules and regulations, the animosity of the authorities, the vested interest of privileged groups, the envy of the guilds. The capital equipment of the individual firms was insufficient, the provision of credit extremely difficult and costly, technological and commercial experience was lacking, most factory owners failed, comparatively few succeeded. Profits were sometimes considerable, but so were losses. It took many decades until the common practice of reinvesting the greater part of profits earned accumulated adequate capital for the conduct of affairs on a broader scale. So I think that Vaush's portrayal of all the factory owners and just crushing it, completely inaccurate. Meanwhile, what was going on for the workers during this period? You had skyrocketing wages. For example, during the Gilded Age from 1870 to 1880, you saw a 48% increase in wages for industrial workers, real wages. This was a period of deflation because of the gold standard. Prices were going down. Conditions were improving very rapidly.
Jobs that Drew, look, I'm not arguing with you about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but you can't just sit there and mischaracterize the way labor markets.
I haven't mischaracterized anything. That is what a market does when there are no protections for workers. The biggest, meanest, fattest bastard who already owns the factories gets all the money and everyone else gets jack.
That's simply not true. That's not how markets work. That wasn't the case during the time of the so-called robber barons. That's never been the case. Vaush is just making this up because that's what Marxist theory says will happen. But he's completely unaware of the historical facts. This is all theory and historically inaccurate.
This is the economics of cuckoldry. As we've seen throughout all of history, regardless of whether or not there was an oversaturation of labor in these areas, in the absence of legal protections, employers will treat people as badly as they are capable. They will enslave you if they can, and if they can't enslave you, they will sharecrop you.
No. Conditions in the factories were bad compared to today, yes. But the reason they're so good today is because of capital accumulation. I mean, 100 years ago, life was really tough, and it improved because of capitalism, because of markets working to accumulate capital and increase the productivity of labor. It had nothing to do with the state and nothing to do with labor unions and everything to do with the capitalist system itself.
And if they can't sharecrop you, they will pay you the lowest amount that you can legally be paid. And this has been
that's why everybody makes the minimum wage, right?
The trend.
They don't make. Very few people make just the minimum wage.
Through American history up to this point, where people in every state are paid the lowest amount corporations can get away with, and they will pay you less without these regulations. See, this is what I mean about freedom. You talk a big game about freedom, but the only freedom you care about is the freedom for pigs to munch more money off the workers doing the actual work. Out there on those farms...
You're now lecturing me on what it is I care about?
Yes, I am. I think you are concerned primarily... And this is why you were a libertarian and a cop. Because the freedom you care about is the freedom cops protect, that of the bourgeoisie. You care about the systems and rules that protect
the city
property.
I worked for didn't have a lot of that. Can you spell it for me?
The institution of the police is one which predominantly protects property rights. You care about property rights.
You're goddamn right I care about property rights. Property rights are fundamental to a functioning society. Look at what happens to countries that don't have property rights. Look at what happened in North Korea. Look at what happened in Cuba. Look at what happened in the Soviet Union. The second the state takes away your property rights, they own everything, and you have no defense against a totalitarian regime. Property rights are foundational to a free society. Look at the extreme idiocy of somebody who's grown up in a society who has enjoyed the fact that society is based around property rights, attacking them. Meanwhile, every country which had no respect for property rights has failed objectively.
something that I do not have in equal measure to, say, Jeff Bezos. What I have in equal measure to him is a life. All of us have lives in equal measure. Laws should protect life. But when you care primarily about protecting property, all of a sudden your considerations are skewed heavily towards those who have more of it. And that's what I'm hearing right now.
I don't know who gave you the impression that I or anybody else who's a libertarian is somehow consumed with this idea of property being what matters. So I hope that we can.
No, we absolutely cannot dispense with that. Property rights are foundational to the libertarian worldview. Really, all rights are derived from property rights. I don't have a right to free speech, okay? I have a right to own my body and use it to speak out against whoever I want. I don't have a right to a free press. I have a right, if I build or purchase a newspaper, to publish in that newspaper whatever I want. All rights are fundamentally derived from property rights.
I'm not going to say anything that insults you or your motivations or anything, and I think that I deserve the same respect.
Are you telling me that as a libertarian, you are not concerned with the protection of property as a fundamental legal value?
You seem to believe that libertarians are consumed with property as opposed to people's protection from crime and violence.
What is your ownership of yourself but your ownership of your most highly prized property? The preservation of property rights is the preservation of life.
You seem to want to characterize police officers as being consumed with this idea of protecting rich people's property. I don't know where you got that. You obviously didn't get that from working as a police officer. Maybe you know police officers who have that attitude. I'm sorry for them or for you and being led astray in that sense. But no, that was not.
Or maybe Vaush is an idiot socialist who sits in his room all day and has no idea what the real world is actually like.
That was not my attitude, and that was not what my employer asked me to do.
Well, if we're not primarily concerned with the protection of property, then maybe we should talk about the greatest road to freedom, which is, of course, wealth redistribution. Much as in the case when the land and the property.
You're characterizing taking money
owners
from someone and giving it to someone else as promoting, what was the word you used? Freedom?
Yes.
I don't think it's an appropriate word to use when it comes to taking money from someone and giving it to someone else. By whose authority would you do such a thing? Because you thought it was a good idea or because you voted on it?
That's where all the authority for my ideas comes from. Yeah, if I think it's a good idea, if I think it's ethical, then I'll argue for it.
Wealth redistribution is not ethical. It is not moral. It is not just. Wealth doesn't just occur. It's created. So how is it just that the state uses coercion to take from those who have created to give to those who played no part in its creation?
That actually carries it out just has to be the one capable of getting the
Well, that's the
job
difference
done.
between you and a libertarian, is that I might think something's a good idea, but I'm not shoving it down anyone else's throat.
Oh, well, see, I think that traditionally, if a person is, subscribed to an ethical position, it's usually good to bring about the conditions which allow that condition to flourish. I mean, we want good things, right?
Those are two different things. You are a slip.
We want good things, but there's a world of difference between things which are voluntarily achieved and things which are achieved through coercion and force. I might think it's a good thing if people donate to charity, but it's a bad thing if I hold a gun to their head and say, give your money to charity.
Free rascal, aren't you?
If
do
you
like
think,
to
for
change the
example,
argument.
that slavery
Creating
is
the conditions for something to flourish is very different from shoving it down their throat.
Okay, well,
you seem to think that it's a good idea to take money from someone and give it to someone else.
How about shoving abolitionism down somebody's throat, right? The Civil War, North versus South, Those Southerners, they were getting awfully uppity down there with their slavery and with their Fort Sumter attacks. I say, if you think ethically that slavery is wrong, which I do and you do as well, I think it's okay to shove that down their throats. I mean, Vernon Sherman went and marched his way on down south, and I tell you, we took a lot of money and property from those folks. I think we can all agree.
I don't think you're going to get too much pushback from me or anybody else.
Abolitionism isn't shoving anything down somebody's throat. It's the slavery that's the shoving, and abolition is the interjection, the defense. Slavery is wrong. The abolition of slavery is a great cause.
Else in the United States about that.
Oh, sure.
I hope that.
Well, I would hope I wouldn't, at least.
Exactly.
So, but in that case, I mean, we did indeed shove abolitionism down their throats, right? We killed a lot of Confederates to prove that point.
Yeah, I don't think that bringing up slavery is a particularly useful example in bolstering your case that we ought to be taking money from rich people at 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 force of government coercion
But we
and giving it to someone else because you think it's a good idea. I don't think those two things have much in common.
well, to them, to
I mean,
the
do you really
Confederates,
think that slavery is similar to the argument against slavery is similar to the argument in favor of taking money from people and giving it to someone else?
we call workers wage slaves for a reason. But yeah, the Confederates thought slaves were property.
That reason? Because you're an idiot.
To them, the Union was taking their property. That
Do
was
you?
the issue. Do I think
you?
they're property? No.
The whole point, the Union wasn't trying to free the slaves anyway. They were trying to prevent the South from seceding. Lincoln famously said, if I can preserve the Union with slavery, that's fine. If I can preserve it without slavery, that's fine too. Not verbatim, but that was the gist of his quote.
But I
Yeah.
think you and I have different
So
definitions.
you would
of
agree
property.
with me that the two arguments actually have nothing to do with each other.
Okay, but you agree then that it's morally justifiable to shove abolitionism down the throat of the Confederates, right? That's a fine
It
thing.
is ethically justifiable for a community, whether a community small, state, or federal. It is legally justifiable, morally, ethically justifiable for a community of people to get together and decide what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, about protecting people's individual rights. Absolutely.
Well-
So do I think that that ought to be something that's constitutionally protected by the federal government? Yes, absolutely. I think we're all disappointed that the Constitution didn't ban slavery.
Well, it depends on the rights we're talking about, certainly. So the right to not be a slave, what about indentured servitude? What about people selling decades of their life for travel over to the United States? Because that was one of the big ways that the Irish came over, for example. They wanted to come over here where there were jobs and less found, so they would say, okay, take me over there in a
Right,
ship.
some
If I
gray
survive 6
form
years
of,
to you.
I get where you're going, some gray form of slavery. No, I don't think that slavery is tolerable, whether it's slightly gray or, heavily gray.
Self-ownership is inalienable.
That should be intolerable to us. I'm just waiting for you to somehow connect the dots from this discussion, on which no one would disagree, connect the dots over to, and therefore we have the right to use our government to take money from people because we think that.
I'm not sure it's quite that clear cut. A lot of the indentured servants, they sold themselves voluntarily. They would in return they would pledge to work for up to 7 years, and they would receive either land or money at the end of their term. Presumably, conditions were really awful in Ireland, and this was like a Hail Mary shot. I'm not saying it was a great system or anything, but if they voluntarily chose to do it, it might have been the best option for them. Luckily, this was 400, 500 years ago. Yeah, things were awful. Thanks to capitalism, things are no longer awful, and nobody really has to do anything like that. Instead, they can just get a job and work on a week-to-week basis.
But
and
that's,
give it to someone else because we think they don't have enough of it.
So
I want to hear those dots get connected.
So the dots are not only connected, we're at the same dot right now. Because indentured servitude, if there were indentured servants in the United States and we said, no more, this is now illegal and we are freeing these indentured slaves, all right? Well, what are we actually doing? What we're actually doing is breaking a contract made between that indentured servant and the person who bought their time. What do workers do when they go to their workplace at 8 a.m. in the morning? They're selling their time. On a shorter time scale, to be sure, and with less preconditions, but the link is right there. On a fundamental level,
you believe that because
we're talking about
slavery
time
is
and
bad,
money.
we have the right to get rid of or otherwise regulate, but including get rid of any contract between any two people.
I think that there's a good reason why the government has rules when it comes to contracts and what you can and can't sell away. For example, indentured servitude.
That's not much of an answer to what I just
I'm not
said.
done. Indentured servitude is illegal in the U.S. You can't sign, like, you could sign a contract saying that, but the government wouldn't recognize it as valid, no matter who you signed it to. Now, I think that that's a good thing, because I think that sometimes in times of desperation, people might agree to legal contracts that are exploitative. And I think it's the right of the government to prevent that exploitation. I think that
governments don't have rights. Communities of people have rights to form a government and enforce criminal statutes, legal frameworks as they see fit to advance the interests of their society.
Such
Governments
as this,
don't have rights.
The prevention of the exploitative contracts that I'm talking about. Now, I think that a lot of the labor that we do today falls under that purview. I think that we have a fundamentally exploitative.
So you want to prohibit 80% of the work that goes on in the economy and watch the whole thing collapse?
Indentured servants weren't. That was the.
Indentured servitude includes
He's simply equating two things which are not the same. That's like saying you think, oh, you can make a thief return stolen property, ergo you must support wealth redistribution. That's absurd.
Includes an element of coercion for enforcement. And that enforcement takes the form of requiring the labor itself to continue. No court would make such a claim on a person's labor in the modern American state, and correctly so. We all agree on this.
Wait, no, that's not true. If you stopped working as an indentured servant, then you could be faced with penalizing fees that would send you to debtor's prison, or if what you did was bad enough, you could be sent to, like, criminal jail. And the same is the case.
And that's why we don't tolerate it, because we don't tolerate coercion.
But no, this happens today. You can break a contract and ruin your life for it. This is a thing that exists right now. The element of coercion that you're describing is present.
Do you know someone who quit his job and went to jail for it?
I know 37 people who did, yes. But also, if you quit your job,
I think that's a more interesting topic than arguing about the definition of indentured servitude.
If you
we should have a podcast about these 37 people. What happened?
If you quit your job when you're contracted to continue labor, you can be sued for it in civil court and your life can be ruined. If you quit your job in a way that brings
this is sort of true, but only in very extreme situations where you're like a very vital part of the organization. Usually when you're receiving a huge salary, the vast majority of workers are at will and can quit at any time. So this is an extreme distortion of the truth here.
Negligence, which is possible though difficult to do, then you could be faced with criminal.
Very difficult to do. I mean, we're talking about walking out in the middle of a surgery if you're a doctor. No, it's very difficult.
Actually, no. Wait, hold on. Isn't that coercive?
Okay, Vaush has made a lot of brain dead arguments in his career as a YouTuber, but this has to take the cake. Why can't a brain surgeon walk out in the middle of brain surgery? Because somebody's going to die, you doofus.
A surgeon not be able to just walk out mid-heart transplant. Like, to do otherwise would be slavery.
Because he has a duty of care as a physician.
Adopted a certain liability that is understood. This is where torts come from. This is where civil liability.
Same as indentured servants.
You're just being silly. I
No,
think you're kidding me.
the thing that you can't understand
You
here
insult your intelligence.
is that labor, the relations between laborers and the bourgeoisie, has been fundamentally the same at its core. It is only transformed in its kindness. Slavery, serfdom, indentured servitude, sharecropping, the modern...
No, voluntary interactions and relationships are not the same as those which are compelled or coerced.
describes the fundamental relationship between owner and operator, between proletariat and bourgeoisie. The only question is, how many barriers are there between what we live with and the just barest skinflint human existence possible? What are the layers that protect us from going all the way back to the BC era? What keeps us from that point? And
I'll tell you what keeps us from that point. Competition between firms bidding up wages towards their marginal revenue value product. It's got nothing to do with the government. It's got nothing to do with the state. The state steals our income, takes our money, gives us a lower standard of living, robs our savings through inflation. The market economy is what has driven human progress and human prosperity. Capitalism. Businesses competing to hire employees and offer them better wages.
truth to that, and the only thing that has ever protected us from that is law. Hard, concrete law, protections, specifically protections for the weak against the powerful. Corporations are powerful. Individual citizens, regular people, are hideously weak. They're weak against corporations. They're weak.
Untrue. Corporations are ultimately beholden to consumers. If that weak consumer doesn't purchase the corporation's product, they will go bankrupt. The only way that firms make money in a capitalist economy is by providing a good or service that people want to buy. That's not the case with the state. The state is beholden to nobody.
Against the government. We must do everything in our power to use law to empower the weak and weaken the strong. Because if we don't do that, then we're a...
What he really means is we need to empower the state at the expense of society. But we've seen how that worked out in the Soviet Union, in Nazi Germany, in Cambodia, in Cuba. This whole ideology of collectivism and aggrandizing state power is horrible. It does not work, and people need to stop advocating for the expanse of state power.
Essentially just enabling feudalism all over again. There were plenty of laws back in feudal empires, they had them too, and those laws existed to reinforce the material ruling power of the people who were in charge, and ours do today as well, which is precisely why people at Wall Street can steal millions and get 18 months in prison if we're lucky, whereas people like you and I, if we got caught like shoplifting from a 7-Eleven, we could get one of 3 strikes that would send us to jail forever. Like the law...
I mean, I don't know where he lives. Maybe the U.S. legal system is a lot more draconian. If you got caught shoplifting here in Canada as a first offense, you would get a stern talking to. I do know California has the 3 strikes law, although that's felonies. I don't think shoplifting applies there either. I'm no American legal scholar. But again, who controls the legal system? Wait for it. It's the state.
Still exists to protect the powerful, but you want to make it protect the powerful even more. You want to strip away protections from the working man. And that's the thing I don't get. That doesn't make people free. Nobody gets freer when they aren't guaranteed a minimum wage or working protections or OSHA.
Absolutely, they're freer when they aren't guaranteed a minimum wage. Here's why. What about those low-skilled workers who don't have a productivity higher than the minimum wage? So minimum wage, let's say I'm Bob. I make 5 widgets an hour and I get paid $5 an hour, $1 per widget. Minimum wage is set to $7. I can't find work. My boss isn't going to pay me $7, not when he can hire Sally, who makes 7 widgets an hour and will work for $7 an hour. Why would he hire me and lose the marginal productivity there? So eliminating the minimum wage allows low-skilled workers the freedom to find employment, to earn some wage, albeit a low one, and while working that wage, to improve their skill set and develop better marketable skills to obtain a higher wage in the future, to network, to gain that experience, to get that line in your resume. And what does raising the minimum wage do? Absolutely nothing good. It does not raise wage rates, okay? This law is purely prohibitory. All it does is price low-skilled workers out of the marketplace. And if Vaush had ever picked up a book on economics, he would understand that. But instead, he's been podcasting his whole life.
They're made less free because now their life gets constricted and the people on top get wealthier.
I worked as a cop for 11